Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just getting set up. We'll be starting momentarily. Really, I should probably post the links before I go live, but oh well. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Paranormal Encyclopedia. Sorry for the later than usual start. My work schedule had changed. So, tonight we were gonna originally talk about what do you do when you're living in a haunted house? We're still gonna do that. Forgive me for reading on air. I've been at work all night. I haven't had a chance to eat. But given the events of yesterday, literally yesterday, in fact, there's another topic I want to get into here. So for those of you who haven't heard, Father Gabrielle Armothe, who was the chief exorcist for the Vatican and for Rome, passed away. I'm not sure what exactly killed him. I'm trying to find that. He's a fairly colorful and controversial figure, particularly for having has said that ISIS was Satan, along with being pretty conservative on the whole. But he was a major figure in demonology. Obviously, I mean, this guy was the chief exorcist of Rome. He's a member of the Society of St. Paul, and he's particularly notable for those of you who aren't up on your Catholic exorcists. But let's see. Yeah, scanning a couple news articles on the subject. I can't find exactly how he passed. For those interested in his work as a demonologist, he wrote a pair of books. An Exorcist Told Us His Story and An Exorcist More Stories about his experiences as an exorcist. There's also a very good book. There's a movie based on it. The movie is terrible. Well, it's a good movie. It's just completely. It's completely wrong on demonology and exorcism in so many ways. It's not even funny. Called what is it? No, not Deliver Us from Evil. The other one. The Rite. That's the one. The book itself was written by Matt Baglio. He went to Rome to do an article on a class of exorcists that was being, or class 4 exorcists that was being taught at the time. And he wrote the book about it. He wrote a book particularly about the one priest who wound up going and becoming an exorcist and working with Father Armothe. Armothe is played in the movie by Anthony Hopkins, who does a wonderful job. Sorry, Anthony Hopkins, for heaven's sakes. But again, it's not accurate. It's not accurate to the book. It's not accurate to possession. It's not accurate to Father Armothe's life and work. But it's a fun movie. The books are all the 3 books are much better and relatively easy to find. At any rate, so Armothe's very big, controversial public figure, but his death got me thinking. Specifically about why I'm doing this show and the people who have come before me. There's a couple of people I want to talk about tonight before I get into the rest of the actual main topic, which would be Lou Gentili, Ed Warren, and Father Joe Rose. Now, those of you who have watched the show regularly will know I did a tribute video for Father Rose right after he passed. So I'm not necessarily going to be retreading too much ground there. But these people were, not Armothe as much. I've read his books, but I never met the man. Whereas I actually did get a chance, actually for that matter, I guess I should talk about Malachi Martin. But I got to meet Ed Warren. I never worked with him, unfortunately, but I did meet him at a few of his lectures. I worked with Lou and Father for years. I didn't work with Malachi Martin, obviously. But again, he's a very significant figure. So I guess I'll wind up talking about him as well. So I'm already meandering all over the place. So why don't I start with Ed Warren, who is particularly important to me because, as I said, and you can hear the whole story of that if you crank back to the special I did for the 1-year anniversary where I talked about my life and how I got into this work. But a lecture by Ed and his wife Lorraine were a large part of what got me headed in the right direction with studying demonology instead of just being interested in ghosts. That's funny. So Ed passed away in 2006. At age 79. His wife Lorraine is still with us and still an active investigator. Ed's a very significant figure. For those of you who don't know, he was recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as a demonologist, which is just about unheard of for a lay person like himself. Most people that are recognized demonologists are actually priests or nuns or monks or some other form of clergy. They're not people like Ed was. They're not lay people. He was also largely self-taught, although from what I know, I believe that he must have received training from another demonologist at some point because he was privy to certain things you can't really teach yourself or find in a book. But Ed's a pretty remarkable figure. There's a whole series of books out there about his work. The Demonologist, Werewolf, Ghost Tracks, Deliver Us from Evil, Ghost Hunters. Let me just look at the whole list, because I'm not going to remember them off the top of my head, which is what I'm trying to do right now. So Ghost Hunters, Ghost Tracks, Graveyard, The Haunted, Satan's Harvest, Werewolf, The Demonologist, Delivers from Evil, In a Dark Place, and The Devil in Connecticut. They've been the subject of two major movies now, being The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2. And aside from the fact that he investigated thousands of cases, and how I don't even know how many people. I mean, he was at it for decades. He was at it for longer than many people sitting to this have been alive, myself included. But he also taught a lot of significant and important people. He taught Ed Warren, or he taught Ed Warren didn't teach himself. He taught Lou Gentili. He taught Dave Constantine. He taught John Zaffis. He taught all of these people. There are a number of groups that are still going that were started by his students. So he's a pretty significant character. I never personally, as I said before, I've never actually gotten to work with Ed, which I regret. But from the times that I met him, having talked to other people who knew him and worked with him, he was actually a very nice guy, pretty down to earth. But he's an important person in this study, in the history of demonology. If anyone out there wants to study demonology, is crazy enough to want to do what I do, you could do worse than starting by reading their books. It's a large part of how I got started. The book, The Demonologist, is a good set of case studies. Gives you an idea of some of the crazier things that can happen. But let's see, what else I want to say about it. I'm sorry I'm a little all over the place tonight. Just having gotten out of work, it's kind of trying to mentally shift gears. And the upside, as I've said on Facebook, for those of you who follow me there, and if not, please go check out the Paranormal Encyclopedia on Facebook, with the in front of it, because there's another Facebook group called Paranormal Encyclopedia that isn't me. I chose the name for the show before I realized there was another thing out there by that name. And at this point, by the point that I realized that I'd done enough episodes and done enough work promoting it, it's like I don't really want to go renaming the whole thing and starting over again. So, like I said, a big part of Ed's legacy, aside from the people he helped, which is huge, obviously, is the people that he trained. His last student before he retired, and then he unfortunately would pass away in 2006, was Lou Gentili. There's a guy who comes in our chat room pretty regularly. I don't know if you're listening out there tonight, named Lord Ruin. Given we've got currently 112 subscribers and an average of 400 views a month, it's not unreasonable that a few other people listening to me, either now live or who will be listening to the recordings, listen to the Lou Gentili show back in the day. It's where I got my start. It started out pretty simple with Lou doing a AM radio station out of Philadelphia. And then he wound up moving to... he switched stations once or twice. He wound up eventually setting up the equipment in his basement and doing his own radio show. He's one of the very first people to do an internet radio show, in fact. Although he was also being syndicated all over the country and broadcast in various places, both legally and illegally. He was on TV numerous times in the original run of the TV series. Back when ABC Family was Fox Family Channel, they did a series called Scariest Places on Earth. And the first week that they did that, right around actually when I first met Lou, he did an investigation of Eastern State Penitentiary for them, which was, quite frankly, the best segment that show had in its entire run, in my opinion. But there's some, yeah, they approached us to do another segment, and that didn't go so well. Basically, they stole our idea and used it for somebody else. And did the wrong thing. Still a little sore about that. But given this was like a decade ago, I'm not going to go into great detail. Lou also did a special in 2001 for the Learning Channel called The Entity, the Terror That Comes in the Night. And then pretty much the very tail end of his life, he did a special called Darren Brown Investigates the Ghost Hunter. You can actually see me in the Darren Brown Investigates working with Lou. Actually, I think I saw him again after that in the hospital, but I think that may have been the very last time I actually saw him up and about. I'm sorry to say. Sorry. Lou passed 2009. It's still... it's not a happy thought for me. It's an unpleasant memory. I miss him a lot. So it says I've got 2 people watching according to the chat. Is anyone alive out there? Someone want to say hello? But Lou, as anyone who listened to the Lou Gentili show, and if you dig around on the internet, you can find some of the shows are still archived. You can find a couple of transcripts of various interviews that we did. Particularly the one with the guy who wrote Forbidden Archaeology. I've noticed that one cropping up, a transcript of that pop up a couple of times. But Lou was a character, as anyone who listens to the show knows. He and I had a very close relationship where we basically would insult each other on the air all of the time, play practical jokes on each other, and generally screw with each other and have a lot of fun. Oh, hey, Circuit Man. So, okay, there is life out there in internet land. Listening to me babble about Lou and Ed. And the reason I've actually been meaning to do a tribute episode to Lou and Ed for a while now. Because really, what I'm doing here is an attempt to carry on what they did. Lou and Ed both did a lot of important work in terms of actually going out and helping people and getting into people's houses and clearing out what was there. But I'm still working on that. I still do cases. There's a gentleman from, I have been in communication, Circuit Man and anyone else who's wondering, with the gentleman who was in the chat last week, about getting him the help that he needs. I've been in touch with other people that have contacted me through the show. And by all means, if there's anybody watching this now or watching this in the future that is having paranormal activity in their home, feel free to email me, kevinm.paranormalencyclopedia@gmail.com. Or again, you can find us on Facebook, the Paranormal Encyclopedia, or Delaware Valley Demonology Research. But aside from that, I think another really important part, Ed trained all of these important figures in demonology that are still active today. Lou taught me, and he taught other people what to do. And getting accurate information out there, I think, is really important. Particularly because of the sheer volume of bullshit that's out there right now. These TV shows, and you get a group of people together that have a vague idea of what they're doing, that go out with a bunch of video cameras and try and find ghosts. and more problematically, in my opinion, people see that and go, I can do that, and go out and try and find ghosts. And that's okay as far as it goes. If you want to go digging around cemeteries and historical sites, you don't need too much training. But people that are going in, I mean, I've seen groups that are like, okay, okay, we've done some historical sites, now let's go into somebody's house. Which, again, if you're dealing with a ghost, is all well and good, but it's very easy, and I've seen it happen, where a group that has some good experience and has a good idea of what it's doing with a haunted house, with a human spirit in it, is up shit's creek when something demonic rolls around. So, and while there are good books out there about how to hunt ghosts, good information on the demonic is harder to find, which is a large part of why I'm doing this. Lou spoke regularly. He did his radio show. Ed spoke all over the planet, wrote books to get valid, accurate information out there. This is one of my efforts to do so. I'm actually currently working on a book myself, specifically, currently tentatively titled When the Ectoplasm Hits the Fan, specifically aimed at informing people on how to haunt, or how to investigate, not how to haunt, violent haunting. True, the Circuit Man points out the idea of connecting with an experienced investigator over the internet and getting trained is still a new idea. That's true. Most of the experienced ones have websites, but something like this is relatively new. The radio show was a good proximity, although we didn't necessarily do things like, I don't know how many episodes back when we did the EVPs. And it's another thing, it's a pain in the ass to find a competent teacher. We're going to get into a lot, it's going to come up a lot more when I get into the second half of the show and start talking about what to do if you're living in a haunted house, just by virtue of finding a good group to investigate your house. A lot of those steps also apply if you're trying to find a good group to hook up with and do investigations. But I'm getting slightly off topic and ahead of myself. So, like I said, Lou passed away 2009. Father Joe passed away this year. He was a good guy. I'm not sure there's more I could say now than I did in the previous tribute episode to him. But, yeah, so basically, the point I'm trying to drive home, and the reason I'm taking a moment to talk about a bunch of people that have now passed away, is that there's a progression to what's going on here. I'm not saying things are new and revolutionary. I'm not just some random goofball who got his own YouTube channel and decided to talk about demonology. There is a degree of pedigree to what I'm doing. And there are other sources out there. If you don't like how I say what I have to say, that's cool. Check out In Lorraine Warren's books. Check out the existing shows from the Lou Gentili show. Look up Father Armothe. Look up Father Malachi Martin. And educate yourself. There's a great line in the Bible. Oh, there's a lot of great quotes in the Bible, obviously, but one of the most relevant to this, in my opinion, is Hosea 4:6, which says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge." There are people that watch this, I'm sure, that get a laugh out of it, who think I'm crazy, and that's okay. There are people who watch this who believe me and are interested, and that's cool too. There are people that just watch this because they're friends of mine. But there are people out there that are watching this and who are going to watch this in the future that are having something happen in their house. And there's a lot. Sometimes what's happening isn't that big a deal. Sometimes it is. And getting the right information to those people is the entire point of this show. I'd like to get this to the point where I'm making some money off of it. I have no problems with the fame that may or may not come out of it, but that's not the point of what I'm doing. The point of what I'm doing is, in fact, the second part of this show, and is keeping going what everybody else I talked about before did, and getting people the information they need when they're having something go wrong in their house. So, let's talk about what do you do if your house is haunted. So, this is a question that just about everybody has at some point. I think whether you actually have a haunted house, or you're just wondering, okay, what if this happened? What do you do? Or somebody knows somebody who has a haunted house. The first question to ask is, well, what sort of haunting is it? If look at the phenomenon that's going on and make a decision. You can make some judgment calls. It's not to say that the demonic can't hide or disguise itself. It can and it does. But on the whole, if you wake up at random times in the night and hear footsteps out in the hallway, you got a ghost. It isn't. Don't freak out just because something weird happens. People, you see all these movies, you see all these TV shows, and people freak out over the goofiest things. If what's happening isn't threatening, don't. Actually, it's good advice in general, but especially if it's not threatening, don't freak out about it. Don't panic about it. And despite what some of the more fundamentalist Christians say, not every spirit phenomenon in the world is demonic. Plenty of it is perfectly harmless. And getting this, oh my gosh, the footsteps in the hall means the devil's here to take my soul mindset. And people are probably laughing as I say this, and I can't say I don't find it funny myself to a point, but it's true. The first thing you gotta try to do, is calm down, look rationally at what's going on. Now, some of it's very obvious. If whatever's in your house is chucking steak knives at your head, you got a problem. And I am not saying that if something blatantly violent is happening, that you should be going, well, what could it maybe be a ghost? For God's sakes, no. But if what's happening is benign, treat it as benign. And also, it affects. The first thing to do if you have something in your house and you're concerned about it, isn't necessarily even to contact somebody like me. What my advice and what I tell my clients when I first talk, one of the first questions I ask, and then advise them to correct if the answer is no, is, have you had your house blessed? 9 times, maybe even 9 times out of 10, if you have a violent haunting, or a regular haunting for that matter, and you get your house blessed, the problem goes away. It's much easier and much less dramatic to get a house blessed than have a whole investigation team come out, and you gotta find the time, and they gotta find the time, and you gotta find one that knows what they're doing, and just get the house blessed. The other thing to do is, if you've got something in your house, if you're that you shouldn't, if you're doing something that you shouldn't, if you're playing with Ouija boards, God help you, if you're practicing satanic rituals, trying to summon demons, doing some, I'm not even going to try and touch it if you're just one of those evil people that, murderers, rapists, and things like that. They're getting demons because you're an evil person. Because most likely, if you're that kind of person, you aren't going to listen to me when I tell you, don't do that! But look at your life and try. If you have a violent haunting, you may have moved into a house that has it, but most of the time, there's something in your life that's giving that spirit grounds to be there. Get rid of it. And I'll give you the same advice that Lou gave when he did the show. And I've had people that work at churches kind of give me a little bit of a lecture on this one, but it's still good advice. Take the stuff to a local church. If you're comfortable with it, go to the priest and ask him to dispose of it properly. If you're not, write a nice, neat little note explaining what's going on, asking it that it be properly disposed of, and drop the stuff off. Loading dock, pew, put it somewhere. Most of the time, yeah, and get the house blessed. I would advise when you're getting your house blessed that you don't, particularly if you're going with a Roman Catholic priest, don't tell them you think the house is haunted. Don't tell them you think it has a demon in them. Particularly with the Catholic Church, you're going to wind up getting dragged into a whole lot of bureaucratic nonsense because of the way the church has created rules to try to prevent the stigma of exorcising people that are mentally ill. I can't say I entirely blame them for wanting to avoid that, because reality check, you don't want to feed people's mental illnesses. But when you have something legitimately paranormal going on, it can be a pain in the rear end to get them to get involved. So just go to the priest. Ideally, use somebody of your own faith. That isn't always possible. If you can't, find someone of a related faith, somebody you have respect for, ideally. Ask them to bless the house. Now, if you look online, you'll find a lot of advice on how to bless houses yourself. For at least a decade, the popular method has been smudging, which involves using sage incense, usually sage, throughout the house. If you go back a bunch of episodes, you can see me already ranting about this when we talked about how to protect yourself, but it's worth repeating. It is not a good idea to... One, it's not a good idea to mix and match forms of protection. Never use a method of blessing or a method of protection just because you read about it on the internet. Use something that's tied into your own individual beliefs. This is not to say that sage doesn't work. It can work just fine. But don't use it. For anything to work, you have to have faith that it's going to work. If you don't believe it's going to work, it's not going to help you. In fact, it's going to make the situation worse. So what you need to do there is use symbols, use things that are associated with your religious and spiritual beliefs. If sage is part of that, use sage. Use holy, if holy water is part of that, use holy water. Use Stars of David, crosses, crucifixes, saints' medals. There's a whole host of things you can use. But aside from that, I don't advise, if you have something in your house, I do not advise trying to cleanse it yourself. And here's why. It's a real simple, practical reason. Most of the time, if you try to clean it yourself, it'll work. You won't have a problem. But there's always those times when it's going to get worse. And potentially when you try to bless a house by yourself and you don't know what you're doing, you can piss it off. If you now have a pissed off spirit in your house and you just tried to perform your own do-it-yourself exorcism, what are you going to do? If you have a priest there, you have somebody who knows what they're doing. They have rituals. They have things they can fall back on. They know what to do. If the shit hits the fan, you don't want to be the guy standing there with your thumb up your posterior going, now what? You get me? Logical? Besides that, realistically, getting your house blessed isn't going to cost money, or at least it shouldn't. Or if it doesn't, it won't cost very much. Just go, you say, hey, I haven't had my house, I just moved into a house. Even if you hadn't, you can stretch the truth a little, though I don't necessarily recommend that. Could you please come bless my house? Have a priest come out, bless your house, bing, bang, boom. See ya, wouldn't want to be you done. And that'll probably deal with the problem. If that doesn't work, you're going to need to find somebody who knows what they're doing. And we're going to get into, I'll get into how in a minute, but let's talk about strategies for surviving until you find competent help, and competent help can get to you. Again, Douglas Adams wrote a great series called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which the titular book, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, has 2 words on the cover. They're really good advice that really apply here. And those 2 words are, don't panic. I realize this can be hard. When you have something that's actively trying to ruin your life in your house, it's hard to stay calm. That's very human and very understandable. But the more fear you have, the more energy you give it. The more energy you give it, the worse it's going to get. So you want to try to keep control of your fear. You want to try to, when something happens, acknowledge that it happened. Don't obsess on it. Don't talk, and don't keep secrets, especially if you have a family living in a house where there are these problems. You need to communicate with each other. You need to trust each other, because it's going to try and wedge you apart. But you need to you need to give it as little attention as you can. The more attention you pay what's going on, the worse it generally is going to get. Which also goes into, if it gives you a name, don't use it. Demonic spirits in particular love to throw out names. It's never the thing's actual name. They'll use I've seen them use the name of a higher level entity, not the true name for Pete's sakes, but a name, because they want you to start using that to draw the attention of the higher level entity and make a bad situation worse. So you need to keep calm. You need to not give it too much attention. Whatever your religious faith is, and I'm not saying you have to be Christian. I'm not saying you have to be Jewish, Buddhist, whatever. You need to try to make an effort to reconnect with it. If you haven't been to church in 10 years and you have a demon in your house, it's a good time to go back to church. Pray, meditate. Use holy water if that's part of your faith. Use incense if that's part of your faith. Use things that you associate with your faith and with protection, with safety. This makes it harder for an atheist, though that inherent doubt can be its own protection. My advice, if you're an atheist and you really have something that's going on in your house, you need to start rethinking the fact that you're an atheist. Just realistically speaking, think about the logical contradiction of, I have a demon in my house, but I don't believe there's a God. Does that really work? Like I said, spend time with your spend time with your family and work. Keep your relationships healthy, because it's going to try to drive wedges between you and other people. Get out of the house when you can. This isn't. People have this image. You get it with the Amityville, you get it with the Smurl haunting, you get it with like every other violent haunting that ever hits the news. Of why don't they just move? I'll tell you why they don't just move. Well, there's a couple of reasons why they don't just move. One, it doesn't do them any good. If you have a demonic spirit in your life, it will. If you move, it's gonna follow you. Two, Well, it's real simple and real practical. You just moved into a house. You've got 20 years or whatever on your mortgage. How easy do you think it is to just up and move, financially speaking? It's not. People think, oh, just move, and it's like, think about the real world. It's not that simple. If you were told tomorrow you have to move out of wherever you live and you can't ever go back, how ready are you to do that tomorrow? You have a lease. You have leases, mortgages, moving all your stuff out. It's not that. It's not as simple as people think, and that's not what I'm advocating. I'm not saying run, but staying at home all the time isn't necessarily healthy for reasons that have nothing to do with the paranormal. Shutting yourself off from people isn't necessarily healthy, and that's more what I'm getting at by saying you get out of the house once in a while. So eventually, obviously, you need to find a group. The good news, if you need to find a group to do an investigation, is there's lots of groups out there today. The bad news is a lot of them have no idea what they're doing, particularly where violent hauntings are concerned. I'd like to say that wasn't true, but let's be honest. Most groups, in my experience, fall into a couple of categories. When you have lots of ghost groups, International Ghost Hunters Society, Philadelphia Ghost Hunters Alliance, other groups that specialize in haunted houses and historical sites, which some are good, some are bad, some are indifferent. The problem is you have a violent haunting, a group that specializes in historical sites isn't going to be real helpful because they don't know what to do. That's not what they do. There are groups, the various groups that specialize in violent hauntings. Some of which mean well, but have no bloody idea what they're doing. There's a whole bunch of subsections in here. You get born again Christian groups that think it's all that they can just pray it all out, and poof, they'll say a couple of prayers, maybe not even a house, they may do it at home, and poof, your house will magically be clean. It doesn't work that way. You'll get people who think that, the skeptic groups, of course, are out there as well, that'll just try and say you're crazy, making it up for attention or whatever. They're obviously completely useless. But specifically, back to the groups that actually deal with violent hauntings. There are groups that have no idea what they're doing. There are groups that are in it for fame and glory or money. There are a couple of organizations out there that will charge you thousands of dollars to talk to them on the phone without ever setting foot in your home. There are groups that... And then there's a very special type of group that's a problem. Satanists and black magicians occasionally try to get involved in helping people with violent hauntings. Again, I have people in my audience, I have friends that are practitioners of various types of magic. I'm not talking about people like Arthur Moyer, who we had on the show a while back, or other types of people that generally practice magic. I'm talking about people that actually knowingly, deliberately summon demons and do other negative types of magic. There's particularly a subsection that practices what's called Goetia, which is a system of magic based on the Lesser Key of Solomon the Mage, that has this brilliant notion. So you have a demon in your house. We're going to come. We're going to do a ritual in your house. We're going to summon an even bigger and more powerful demon that'll boot out the demon that you have. I'm not kidding. As ridiculous as this probably sounds, I'm really not kidding. There are people that think this is a good solution to having a demon in your house. Do you see the? Do I need to explain why it's ridiculous to summon one demon to get rid of another? Go back to a concept that we've talked about many times with grounds. Okay, maybe hypothetically it worked and you got rid of the one thing, but you let in something bigger and more powerful. Yeah, the Black Magician will do a ritual that's supposed to make it go away. It will probably go away until he goes home. Then it's going to eventually come back and it's going to get worse. And we're going to get to the worst thing in a minute. Or in a few minutes, I should say. But then you have the groups that actually have some vague notion of what they're doing. They're hard to find. There's a couple of things you can look for with a group to tell it how full of it they are. The first warning sign that you're dealing with a group that's full of it is if they're asking for money, you probably should keep looking. There's a caveat here. When a lot of groups, my own included, come to your house, you have to realize I work a shift job. I work 3 to 11, 11 to 7, 7 to 3. I don't make that much money. The people I work with don't make that much money. A lot of other groups work regular, ordinary jobs. We're not getting rich here. If you live 6-hour drive away in each direction, it's reasonable for me to say, okay, I want some gas money. It's reasonable to say, okay, I want you to cover the tolls. It's reasonable, if the distance is great enough to say, okay, you need to let us crash on your couch, floor, whatever. Or if you can afford it or more comfortable that way, crash in a hotel room. Reasonable travel expenses based on distance is different than asking thousands of dollars. I've asked people for travel expenses before. I've never in my life asked for $50, let alone $100 or $1,000. I think usually the most I've asked for is $20. No, maybe 30 or 40, but that was having people come from a particular distance away. It's a reality of, again, I work a regular job. I can't afford to drive everywhere at the drop of a hat. If you can't afford it, I and any other legitimate groups will help you either eat the cost and come out ourselves, or find somebody in your area who can do it. And there are groups all over the country that know what they're doing, so it's not like I'm the one and only group. I'm not. I'm going to actually give you in a second a list of legitimate groups out there that you can contact other than my own. Just particularly because some of these cover areas I don't. So actually, before I get into some other details, let me go over some of the groups that in my opinion are good and are worth looking into if you're having a problem. These are not the only groups that know what they're doing. These are just groups that I've either worked with or have good first-hand accounts from other people who have worked with them that know what the heck they're doing. TAPS, the Atlantic Paranormal Society, is a great place to start. They have a whole webpage where you can look up paranormal groups all over the country and find somebody near you. Usually if somebody lives too far away from me to come out, that's where I'll send them, unless I know a group in their area. In Connecticut, there is New England Society for Psychic Research, which is run by Lorraine Warren. Warrens.net is their website. There is Paranormal Research Society of New England, which is run by John Zaffis. He is a very competent investigator. I am looking up their website for you all. That's www.prsne.com. There is the Society for Paranormal Research and Education, which is based in Pennsylvania. which is www.spreparanormal.org. I know that those folks. I've worked with them before. They know what they're doing. I would, if you live out in that direction, I would definitely recommend talking to them if you need an investigation. Let's see, other good groups I can recommend. I think those are the main ones I can think of off the top of my head. Again, there are other legitimate groups out there. This is not all of them. This isn't even half of them. It's just the ones I have some degree of experience with to say, okay, I know these guys know what they're doing. And again, you can email them, you can email me. We work with you to find somebody more local to you if you need it. And demonologyresearch.webs.com, which is the website for Delaware Valley Demonology Research. You can also find us on Facebook, Delaware Valley Demonology Research, or you can just email, contact me here. But, okay. And here's another thing I think it's actually worth saying. Okay, actually, in fact, so you found a group, you're going to email them. Let's talk about what you should send, because I get a lot of emails from prospective clients. I'm going to have to waste a lot of time going back and forth, wrestling with them to get the basic information I need to figure out what's going on. My advice if you're going to email a group for help, one, tell them where you live. You don't have to give the exact street address, but at least give them a ballpark idea. Eastern Pennsylvania, near Philadelphia, near Boston. Give them some vague idea because if you're emailing a group in PA and you live in California, they're probably going to refer you to somebody who lives in California. Again, this probably sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people I'm like, okay, well, they give me a phone number. Let's look up the area code of the phone number and trying to play detective to figure out where the heck they're contacting me from. I just tell them, if you don't want to give exact details, give them at least some idea of where you live. Give a state, please. At the very least. Also, describe what's actually happening. Don't say, help, I have a demon in my house. Describe what the demon's done. Describe what you've seen. In particular, another pet peeve. There's an old saying that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. I get a lot of people that have read theosophical texts or grimoires or various other books on demonology, one or two books on demonology, that think, therefore, they know, oh, well, I have a class 6 demon from the ninth plane of Baator. And when you're assuming the demonologist you're contacting knows whichever particular system you're talking about, they may not, because if you're contacting a Christian demonologist, they're probably not an expert on theosophy. If you're contacting a theosophist, they probably aren't familiar with they may not be familiar with Binsfield's classification of demons. Feel free to include, well, I think it's a this, but for God's sake, just explain what's happening. I would much rather, I think most investigators would much rather you just tell them what happened than what you think did it. And this goes for a lot of other things, like, oh, I have 3 demons in my house. Well, how do you know you have 3 demons in your house? Well, how do you know they're demons, for that matter? What have they done? And you get people who are very upset because you want details. I would also recommend, if you don't want to send it in the first email, that's okay. But be aware, the investigator you talk to is going to want a lot of information, some of which you're going to probably find very personal. They're going to want to know if you or anyone in the house has a history of mental illness. They want to know if you have any physical illnesses. They want to know every single medication you take for everything under the sun. And this can be very upsetting for people. And I understand that, because you're like, well, I know what I'm experiencing is real. But you have to look at it objectively from their perspective. They don't know you from Adam. If you're hesitant to give them basic information, and every legitimate group is going to want this information eventually, they got to ask themselves, well, why won't they tell me? What are they hiding? But you're going to want to give that. You got to give them that information. Personally, I will not enter. If you will not give me that basic information, I will not enter your house. I will probably not even make a phone call. And personally, and other groups may not do this. But personally, I prefer to make the initial contact through email. Honestly, because I don't necessarily want to give people my phone. Go calling people on caller ID and. Also, it's also much easier for me to deal with email personally. And you need to be able to give concise. You need to give concise, useful information. Again, specifics. What's happening, not what you think is doing it. It's like when you go to a doctor. In fact, I've used this analogy when talking to clients before. When you go to a doctor, you don't go in and say, I've got pneumonia, give me antibiotics. He doesn't go, well, okay, scribble, 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 here's your prescription. You talk about symptoms. You talk about what's bothering you, and then he tells you it's pneumonia. And I've had the experience where, I've had bronchitis many times over my life. Went to a doctor. They asked, well, what's wrong with you today? I have bronchitis. I'm like, no. That's a diagnosis. What's wrong with you? I went through all my symptoms. They did the checkup, and they went, yeah, you have bronchitis. Give them the symptoms. Don't give them the diagnosis. Let them make the diagnosis. Because if you're... Also, let's be honest, and not to be rude, but if you know as much as you think you do, why do you need help? Just tell them what's going on. Answer the questions they give you. Honest, and be honest, for heaven's sakes. If you start holding back, if you give them the wrong information, it's going to be, one, it's going to be harder for them to actually help you, and two, they're going to start questioning your honesty, and when they're not, anything that you're saying is actually happening, which isn't going to do you any good. Again, most of this probably sounds obvious to a lot of you, but it still comes up all the bloody time. There's also the reality of, and part of that, and I do understand, is you get people that are in crisis and not necessarily thinking rationally. Then you get the people that are deliberately give you incomplete information to test you, which is really not productive and frankly more than a little insulting. Just give them just give them the information they ask for. Give them as much information in your initial contact as you're comfortable doing. I've never, in 20 years of doing this, I never read an email from a client and went, they're giving me too much about what's going on in their house. Never happened. There may be an investigator out there who has reached that point, but it's not me. And then you're going to wind up, you'll probably email them back and forth and eventually get on the phone with them. They're going to have more questions for you. Some of which are going to get repetitive, and there's psychological reasons for that, and we'll get into that as we get into how to conduct an investigation. But you need, again, answer the questions, be honest, cope, and if they're a little hard and a little uncomfortable, it's dealing with what's going on. And listen to the advice they give you. Sometimes that advice is not going to be spiritual. I've had contact from people and said, before you talk to me, you really need to go talk to a shrink. And yet that may not be what you want to hear, but sometimes it's the best advice. Um, then go talk to a shrink, see what the shrink says, report back. It's not usually, at least when I say that, I'm not saying don't shut up, don't talk to me anymore. I'm saying go talk to a shrink, and then we'll talk. Let's rule out the mundane before we deal with the paranormal. Um, and if you have talked to a shrink, include that. Include what the shrink's opinions are. Or include that kind of information. Again, on one level, I feel silly saying all this because I think most of it should be obvious. But again, I've had enough time. This is all based on experiences I've had talking to clients. This isn't. So while it may sound obvious to many of you, trust me, it isn't as obvious as you think. And again, reality is that sometimes they're not going to be able to they may not be able to help you. You may in fact have reached the ghost group. You may have reached the group too far away. They may be overloaded with cases, but they should be able to direct you to somebody who can, and you can go from there. And the reality is, guess what? A lot of times we do get overloaded. Paranormal like occurrences are rising lately. Reports of them even more so, but legitimate ones are definitely on the rise. Violent ones particularly are on the rise. So we're all pretty busy. So, you may want somebody out there tomorrow. The reality may be that they can't. If it's a life or death situation, things change. But just be aware of the reality, the world that we live in, and the realities involved. So, okay, so you've got a group. What to expect? When an investigative team comes to the house, they're going to wind up sitting everyone down and interviewing them. You're going to ask a bunch of questions you've already been asked. You're going to be every member of your family is going to be asked about what they've experienced in the house. And investigators are going to want to get individual information. If your daughter saw something that you described on the phone, they're going to want to ask your daughter to describe it. It's worth noting as well, this is not the time to invite the entire extended family and all the neighbors over. If keep the people in the house to the people that actually have something to relate. It's turning it into a circus isn't going to help you. It isn't going to help the investigation. It's just going to make everything a mess. Again, answer the questions. Usually, and they'll probably wind up doing this, they'll give you a specific spot in the house. Living room's common for lots of obvious reasons, and you just stay put, and they'll go wandering your house. A good group is not going to go destroying your house. They're going to wind up just doing photographs, video recording, audio recording, and things of that nature. They may or may not share what they get with you. Which can be frustrating. It's your house. You probably want to see. If they got some crazy ghost photograph, you may want to see it, and that's very understandable. But here's the thing to realize. If you have a violent haunting, and they get an EVP saying, they're all going to die. They're all going to die or something. It's going to probably freak you out. They're not necessarily going to want to play that for you. And the reality may very well be that they may come out, spend 6 hours in your house, and nothing happens. The day before, the chairs in the kitchen were dancing like can dancers, but the day they're there, nothing happens. That's okay. They aren't going to assume that you're crazy just because they go out there once and nothing happens. Which is the other thing to realize is that they're going to have to come out multiple times. At least the majority of the time. Just because nothing happens doesn't mean you're crazy. It just means that nothing happened. Particularly with when you're dealing with a ghost, it's not all that bright. Things tend to be somewhat random. When you're dealing with something demonic, there's a strategy to what's going on, and they don't want to be kicked out of the house. So when somebody comes that has connections and knowledge to kick them out of the house, they often lie low. Investigators know this. That's why they keep coming back. Most of the time, if there's something legitimate in your house, most of the time it's going to eventually reveal itself. If it doesn't, there are solutions to that. This is the wild and wonderful world of provocation. I don't want to go into great detail about provocation because this is... What's a good analogy? Provocation is like snake charming. You got a very deadly snake, thing in front of you that you're poking with a stick. You don't want to do it unless you're ready for when it bites you. And it's going to, and if you do provocation in a house with a demon in it, it's going to bite you in the ass hard. But it is an option. Once they've gathered evidence and are reasonably convinced there's something in the house, the most likely first thing that's going to happen, if it hasn't happened already, is a house blessing. Which goes back to the original advice I gave you all, that get the house blessed. You saved the step. Now, just because you got the house blessed doesn't mean that another house blessing may not be in store, just by virtue of the first priest may not have been in his experience. The first priest probably wasn't specifically trying to get rid of a spirit. And you bring in somebody who knows what they're doing and is expecting that they can fiddle things around and actually tackle what's going on. The next thing, from there, they can go further. You can get prayer groups praying for the house. You can get a mass maybe set over the house remotely, which actually does work, believe it or not. Up to and eventually an actual exorcism. Fun tip that a lot of people don't know. And I should have mentioned this when I first talked about getting the house blessed. If you're getting your house blessed, open your closets, open your boxes, open your drawers. Not the external doors of the house, but every internal door or container should be opened. As I've said before, I believe demons are freaking lawyers. They look for any technicality to stay put. So if there's a little closet with the door closed, it'll go hang out in there because, well, you didn't bless the closet, so obviously that's still cool for me to stay in. That said, if there's a door you can't open, you lost the key, box you can't open for some similar reason, there are things that can be done. It's going to occasionally lead to the great fun of you get knocking, pounding, and howling and screaming all from the other side of that door that you couldn't open. Because what's happened is it's sealed in that room. Or closet, or whatever it is. But that's actually pretty uncommon. Again, open everything up. Once the house blessing, or exorcism for that matter, is over, you close it all back down again. Keep in mind, even if you have a full-blown ritual of exorcism performed over your house, it may not take the first time. Sometimes it takes more than one. That also goes for exorcisms of people, which most of the time you're not going to need a person exorcised. That's pretty rare. It's the house that's going to be exorcised. Actually, most of the time it's just going to be blessed, which is a lesser ritual of exorcism. But so be aware, when you get the house blessed, and then when you get it exorcised, things may get better, things may stay the same, they may get worse. It's not a stretch to say that by getting the house blessed or exorcised, you're sort of declaring war on what's there. Most of the time, this is a good thing, because will has a lot to do with this. You need to be clear that you want it out. And everything that you're doing, you should be keeping this in mind. You want it out. Do not give it room to stay. Do not make any sense like it's welcome. Otherwise, it's not going to go. You have mentally, physically, spiritually. You've got to show at the door. And again, if you have any occult objects in your house, especially things like Ouija boards or those intended for the summoning of demons, get them the hell out of the house. There's nothing. And here's another thing about the aftermath of having your house blessed or exorcised. If it takes, it's only as good as your will. If you let the spirit back in, it's gonna come back. Don't start fooling. Once it's out of your house, don't think you're okay to start using a Ouija board again. Don't think you're okay to start summoning. There's a school of thought within some more inexperienced black magicians that, okay, I screwed up my satanic ritual. Okay, the nice Christian demonologist will come show me how to fix it, and I'll go back to summoning demons. It doesn't work that way. Even if I could show you how to fix it, you're just going to wind up with a problem again. And here's the key. Here's a really critical point that goes along with that. If you open the door back up, not only are you going to get what you had to begin with, it's going to get worse. Let me quote the Bible on this one. Because the Bible has something very good to say on the subject. Which is Matthew 12:45. Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be unto this wicked generation. If you bring it back, it's gonna come back with its friends. Matthew 12:44, for that matter, directly relates. And then it says, "I will return to the house I left." Once it is, on its arrival, and it finds the house vacant, swept clean, and put in order, it's moving back in with 7 worse than itself. So yeah, if you go and you fix a couple of things and then let it back in, your life is going to get worse. You're better off not getting it. If you're going to keep doing the things that brought it into your life to begin with after it's gone, you're better off not asking for help in the first place, because all that help is going to do is make it worse. Which is nice and depressing, isn't it? The last bit of major advice that goes with if you're living in a house like this. It's very easy to get, that's what I'm looking for, discouraged. Because you'll reach out to groups that are too busy to help you, that don't know what they're doing, that only deal with little ghosty cases. You can often find clergy that will clam up the moment they're happy to bless the house until you say it's haunted, and then all of a sudden they don't want anything to do with you. Don't lose hope. There is help out there. There are company groups out there that can and will help you. And they're not going to ask for money. They may ask for travel expenses or something like that if you live far enough away. Usual rule of thumb, certainly in my case and many other cases, is more than 2 hours away, we want gas. That is flexible. It's not a hard and fast rule. But you're not going to pay hundreds of dollars, let alone thousands, for a legitimate group. They're out there. You can find them. You can get help. And realistically speaking, these things feed on negative emotion. They feed on hate, they feed on despair, they feed on fear. You need to keep things as positive and upbeat as you can. That can be hard. And I'm not saying for 1 second that isn't hard. But you've got to fight. If you want to stop what's happening in your house, you've got to fight it. Circuit Man observes, not to mention, if you're a demon summoner who needs help from a Christian to fix your mess, you should consider that you're a crappy demon summoner and need a new hobby that you don't suck at. Yeah. I can't really argue with that. And then again, I'm not entirely convinced that there's such a thing as a competent demon summoner. But that's a different argument. Let me see. I've covered most of the basic information you need. Some of it probably in greater detail than is necessary. Oh, there is one other subject to cover. Or two, rather. One of which is what Lou used to call feeling cases. I get calls from people from time to time who will tell me I get this horrible feeling of dread every time I go into my... To borrow from Ghostbusters, I get a feeling of dread every time I go into my basement or attic. You know what I tell them? Don't go into your basement. Don't go into your attic. Get the stuff that you need out of it and just close it off and don't use it. There's not a whole... if you have a part of your house that feels bad, even if you consider yourself psychic, and I'm not going to get into whether or not you're actually psychic or you just think you are. I will say that there are plenty of people that think they're psychic that aren't. Or at least are not nearly as much so as they imagine. But there's not a whole lot I can do because you have a bad feeling in part of your house. If I go out and do an investigation and the only thing that's happened is you've had a bad feeling in part of your house, I can do some EVP, I can do some photographs, most likely nothing's going to happen. Except maybe I'll get the same bad feeling. Maybe not. As Drew pointed out in a previous episode, get the house checked out. Look for water damage, look for mold, look for subsonic sounds, look for other natural explanations. There may very well be a legitimate reason that you feel a negative feeling in part of your house that has nothing to do with the paranormal. If it doesn't get the house blessed, won't hurt anything. By and large, there's not much we can do because you think you get a bad feeling in some part of your house, and especially if it's not a part of the house, if you can't find a natural explanation for it, you have the house blessed, and it's still some random part of your house you don't need to use all that much. Just don't use it. It's that simple. Most likely I'll say most likely there's a psychological explanation for why you have that feeling in that part of your house. Just to say that you're crazy. It may be that the architecture's a little funny in that area, and it may be any one of 100 of other mundane and ordinary explanations for why you have a bad feeling in part of your house. The other set of things is use your head. there are cases where people think their house is haunted, and it really isn't. And if the person took a moment and poked around, they could probably have figured that out. I've talked about the house, for example, that had raccoons living under it. If people living there, very understandably, let somebody was murdered in that house, get in their heads, and were convinced when all they needed to do was go check it out and figure out, oh wait, it's raccoons. Lauren Ruin asks a very interesting question. Do ghosts on mentally insane / schizophrenic people, I think to correct the grammar a little, are ghosts on the mentally insane / schizophrenic people harder to get rid of than ghosts the ghosts for people who are more mentally stable? Oh no, I see what you're asking. You're asking if the ghosts of the mentally insane. Oh, and I'm sorry, I should have seen that given you put the of it afterwards. So are the ghosts of the mentally insane or schizophrenic people harder to get rid of than the ghosts of people who were mentally stable when they were alive? That's a really interesting question. I don't deal a lot with human spirits. You usually, once I get involved in the case, it's usually sort of like, okay, you're bringing in the tactical nuke to get rid of it. It's not usually that range. There's usually two ways of dealing with a human spirit in the house, one of which is religious and spiritual and is get the house blessed. The other is a more complicated way involving being able to essentially spirit therapy and trying to deal with it, whatever's leaving it bound to the earth. I would assume that it's harder because you have to deal with those psychiatric issues on top of the fact that it's dead. I don't know for certain. I would agree with Circuit Men that most ghosts are in themselves sort of mentally unstable to begin with. Look at how they act. For that matter, look at just the fact that they're stuck here for a reason. There's something that's not allowing them to pass on. A lot of the reasons they can't pass on are mental, or highly emotionally charged, and they get stuck in those emotional states and aren't necessarily thinking rationally. Not being psychic, I haven't had that many conversations. I haven't really had a long, detailed discussion with a ghost about, so how does it make you feel being dead? But how does it make you feel? It'd be interesting to do, actually. But I think ultimately it may be a little more difficult when they already have existing mental problems before they die. But having mental experience with regular human spirit hauntings as opposed to violent demonic hauntings, I couldn't say for certain. Okay, that pretty much covers the topic of the night, I think. I've covered what to do, I've covered what not to do, I've covered how to find help, I've talked a little bit about Ed, Lou, and Father Armothe. Does anybody in the chat have any questions? Otherwise, I'm probably going to wrap it up in a minute. That's an interesting question. Has the demon ever recognized Lou, and was it scared of him? Not when I've never heard one refer. I've heard them refer to him by They refer to him by name before sometimes in EVP, but not necessarily that much about, oh, you're him. um, I know Lou said, Ed said a couple of times of having demons go, I know who you are. I would wager a guess that they're not generally afraid. Here's the thing. Demons are fallen angels. As far as I know, and I could be wrong, but demons are fallen angels. They exist on a power level so far removed from humans, it's not even funny. Ed said more than once, I should say. You know, no demon is more powerful than God, and that's absolutely true. But they're all more powerful than ordinary humans. They hate. Granted, a human that knows what they're doing has a degree of power and authority over the demonic. And obviously they can cast out. This is the whole basis of the concept of exorcism. Should probably do an episode on exorcism coming down the road, down the pipe. But on the whole, they're not afraid of us. On the other hand, they generally hate us. I think it's fair to say that when Ed or Lou showed up on a case, the demons were never so happy to see them. It's like, it wouldn't terribly surprise me to find out that there's some equivalent of a bounty if there wasn't some kind of bounty downstairs for their heads. I think it was Lou that once joked that there's probably a post office in hell somewhere with Ed's picture up on the most wanted, just like we do. But yeah, I don't know specifically of that happening. I don't know much about the story. I just remember reading in one of the books, I think in the Demonologist to be precise, of Ed commenting that he'll go into houses or go talk to people that are possessed, and they go, "I know who you are, Ed Warren." I was always a little curious about myself, but he never went into great detail. I think it was just more of, they got his, thousands of cases, 50 years of investigating. They knew it's like, oh no, is this guy again? Certainly priests describe pretty regularly that you'll go into a house. I can think of a specific example with that. He was involved with an exorcism of a teenage, and he talks about this in the Demonologist, of a woman who was practicing actual devil worship Satanism, and involved herself in a satanic ritual involving basically becoming a bride of Satan. And it was going back and forth, and they were trying to exorcise her, and it was hard because of the fact that she'd willingly dedicate herself to the devil. But she got involved in another case at the same time, because most demonologists, not necessarily exorcists in my experience, but demonologists tend to take multiple cases at the same time. But another young girl who was being possessed, and the demon, it was the same demon in the two girls, and it was like, it actually talked about knowing who he was. It talked about, in reference to two cases. It clearly knew exactly what was going on. And just made the whole situation. It made the situation decidedly worse. You can read all the details. I think the story is The Servant of Diane or something to that effect. Because the demon claimed to basically be a servant of the Greek goddess Diana. The Roman goddess Diana. Oh, actually, there was a Greek. Roman goddess Diana. It's 1 in the morning. Parts of my brain are going a little loopy. But yeah, definitely exorcists talk about demons knowing them by name, knowing that very common one is knowing a guy in plain clothes as a priest, even though they've never met him before. But may even refer to him by name and know intimate details of previous cases they've worked on. Has my patron saint ever helped me in any way during a case? So, when I originally was confirmed many years ago, if I'm freaking 40, I'm old, I chose St. George. I've never actually called on St. George, but not that necessarily it's a terrible idea. He was, Dragon Slayer and all that. But the one I associate much more with nowadays is Saint Michael. Certainly, who I would have chosen as a patron saint if at the time I knew what I know now. Because ironically enough, when I was Catholic way back, when I was first going through confirmation, I was interested in ghosts. I wasn't really interested in demons. On the other hand, I did at the time want to be a cop, and among many other things, St. Michael's the patron saint of police officers. I didn't think to look that up. Oh, then again, this was the 80s. There was no such thing as the internet for most people back then. The internet was a military thing. It wasn't something you could readily look up. My family really wasn't all that in. Well, my parents weren't really all that know about Catholicism, although my grandparents might have known. Remember that whether the priest or the nuns I was working with probably could have told me if I had thought to ask somebody. Who's the patron saint of police officers? But I've called on Saint Michael more than once, and yeah, he's angels, in my experience, I'm not going to say Michael himself personally shows up every time I call on him. He doesn't. I'm not that important. But I've had angels show up on cases before. And I've noticed them. More often than not, I've had angels show up on cases, I think, and I don't know. Angels are around us all the time. But angels... Demons, when they show up, keep in mind, demons are creatures of pride and creatures of ego. When they show up, they want to let everybody know they're there. Angels are more subtle. Not in ages past, clearly, but these days, angels are much more subtle than they used to be. And certainly more so than demons. Large part of what I think is simply because being good, they're creatures of humility, not pride. They don't need all the acclaim and all the attention the way the demons do. But they're there. To quote Ed Warren, for that matter, if there weren't any angels, we'd all be dead. The good heavens, the mess people... people have made a royal mess of angels and angelology anymore with just seeing them everywhere. They're there, but the thing to understand about angels is, yes, they show up. They show up within your daily life, and certainly in work like what I do. But one, they are usually subtle about it, and two, for goodness sakes, they're there to serve God, not to serve your petty whims. People have this ridiculous notion that they can pray to angels, which right there is a mistake. Angels are servants; they're not gods. To get them to to help them avoid speeding tickets, to help them get the rent money they need, to help them get the new job, do all this other goofy stuff, and it's like no. Angels don't show up because you tell them to. You can't. Humans can't tell angels what to do. We don't have that authority. Back in the Middle Ages, as Drew's commented on before, the idea of summoning a demon was actually considered a far greater sin than summoning was a far lesser sin to summon a demon than to summon an angel, because by summoning an angel, you were claiming the authority that was only God's. It was still not a good thing to try and summon a demon, but you were in much bigger trouble if you claimed to be able to summon angels, because you're not supposed to be able to do that. I would suggest if you need help, pray to God as you understand Him. Do not try to go to angels, because angels are servants. God's the boss. Ask God if He thinks you need one, He'll send an angel. And your guardian angel is already looking out for you, and if it's something he needs to be involved with, he's going to be involved. I keep using he, but angels definitely in God, in my opinion, gender doesn't have a lot of meaning as we understand it. It's just I'm 40. For hundreds of years, the gender-neutral pronoun in the English language has been he, so I use he. It's less unwieldy than I don't never agree with switching it to she because it seems truly arbitrary and it's less unwieldy than he, she, or it just doesn't seem right unless you're dealing with the demonic spirits. And they is confusing to me at least because it's supposed to be plural. Good question. Lord Ruin has asked, have I ever met my guardian angel during an investigation? I've encountered angels during investigations. I haven't necessarily stopped and had a conversation with the one. One of which at some point was probably my guardian angel. I couldn't specifically go, oh, that's my guardian angel, or that's one who came by for a visit. So my answer would be, I assume so. I don't know for certain. Any other questions? Because I am probably going to wrap this up soon. It's 1 in the morning. I'm sort of tired. I did just get out of work. And I do have to work tomorrow. So any other questions, comments, concerns? Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up. Good night, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you didn't like it, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe anyway. That constructive criticism is always welcome if you think I could be doing something better. Also, feel free to comment if you think you know somebody if you yourself or you think you know somebody who would be an interesting guest to have on the show. I am working on trying to find us guests. I am sorry that I wasn't able to do politically incorrect, or not politically incorrect, what am I saying? Forgotten Fairy Tales this week. I've just been too busy with work, so I'm going to try to do 2 this coming week to make up for it. So for now, good night, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Next week, we will be back to our regular scheduled time of 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, good night, gang.